Unluckiest deaths in history. Ever read about the unusually tragic death of some historical figure, or even just the random old lady across the street and think, oh, that sucks? Well, you're in for a few more of those. Starting off this list is Francois Vatel, one heck of a perfectionist. He was the maître d'hôtel, or maître d', for French nobility. In case you didn't know, a maître d' is the master of the house, basically a general in terms of waitstaff at a restaurant or overall event. They make sure that everything is in line from decorations to food and that all guests are always happy. Now, if you've ever worked in any form of customer service, you know how stressful this can be, especially when you can't tell your guests to frig off because they're literal royalty. Unlike customers today who just think they are. Francois was in a career of pure stress, but he was the best at what he did, having been formally recognized by many top chefs across France for his ability to ensure guest satisfaction. I mean, how often do you hear stories about royal servants? Almost never, except for Francois. History often mistakes Francois for being a chef himself, but that was never the case. He just handled everything in the front of house. Anyway, this story begins and ends all the way back in 1671 in Fancy Pants, France. It was at this time that France was experiencing a golden age under Supreme French King Overlord Leaderfella Louis XIV, France's and history's longest known reigning monarch to date. This big bushel of baguettes ruled for almost 72 and a half years. Under his rule, French power expanded across the world, arts and culture were flourishing, and the wealthy were living in utmost extravagance. Sure, there were plenty of wars going on in the background, but that's for the poor people to worry about. With such mindless self-indulgence pouring out of every orifice, parties, galas, celebrations, shindigs, and balls were just the norm. But these royal retreats demanded a professional to ensure that everyone kept a crusty yellow smile on their dusty white faces. That's where Francois came in. Having a strong resume of serving under notable French figures you've probably never heard of, like this guy and that guy, Francois was given the task of organizing a banquet in King Louis's honor for over 3,000 people. That's 3,000 of the most rich and powerful people of the age. You don't want to disappoint them, do you? You can't. It's not an option. Do you know what they would do to someone who messed up the king's banquet? Well, that option wouldn't be invented for another 100 years, but it's a quick end no matter how you cut it. The feast was to last across 3 days, and Francois was given just 2 weeks to prepare. So with no time to waste, he nervously took to the task. Over the next 15 days, Francois managed to get all of his French ducks in a row. Drapes were draped, silverware sparkled, chandeliers shimmered, and guests were gobsmacked. All 6,000 of them. Yeah, over double the anticipated party size showed up. Luckily, there was still plenty of food to spare. But another kick in the dick for Francois was the fact that it was raining, canceling the planned fireworks for the evening, which bummed out several of the guests. Well, that's just uncontrollable circumstances, you might say, as you pull out your brown tooth. But not to Francois. Remember, he was a perfectionist, and things were not perfect. Besides these 2 minor infractions, the first day went off without a hitch, but the second day would prove to be Francois' last. In the morning, Vatel received devastating news. Only half of his fish order for the breakfast buffet had arrived. He knew that without the precious poisson, people would be palpably peckish. This was the last straw. Francois spiraled into a panic, knowing that he had failed in his duties and he would forever feel the crushing weight of his shame for the rest of his life. But the rest of his life wouldn't actually be that long, as shortly after receiving the news and breaking down into an inconsolable mess, Francois rushed into his bedchambers to right his wrong the only way he knew how. Standing by his bedside, he brandished his iconic ceremonial stabbing sword and rammed it through his own tummy. He laid in a puddle of his own blood, undiscovered for some time until, "Yo, Francois, the rest of the fish is here." Yeah, that's right. The remainder of the order arrived almost immediately after Francois decided to carry out a permanent solution to a temporary problem. His body was then taken from the palace and buried in secret while the rest of the guests partied on. Nearly every aspect of Isadora Duncan's life could be summarized by one word: tragic. Childhood? Tragic. Adult life? Tragic. Family? Tragic. Career? Successful and groundbreaking, but then tragic. All of this capped off by her sudden, unlucky, and tragic death. Born and raised in the sparkling cesspit that is San Francisco, California in the 1800s, things were already not off to a great start. She was the youngest of 4, with a loving mother and supportive and wealthy banker father, until his bank collapsed under mysterious and fraudulent circumstances, subsequently leading to a marital collapse under mysterious and infidelitous circumstances. He then died in a boat crash several years after that. It is said that his last words were somewhere in the ballpark of, so, after Papa's bank went rupt and her parents defaulted on their marriage, the struggles really stacked up. She lived with her mother and siblings, moving to Oakland, California to begin life anew. She attended school from ages 6 to 10, but dropped out, finding the schooling system restrictive, boring, and lame. Instead, Isadora and her siblings earned their daily bread by teaching the local yokels the art of dance. Thankfully, years of doing the hokey pokey allowed Isadora to turn herself around. After all, that's what it was all about. She joined a formal theater company at the age of 19 to expand her art. Problem was, the extent of dance at the time was very rigid and emotionless. Instead, Isadora yearned for something a little bit more free-flowing and expressive. She wanted less of this, and a little bit more of this. But the dance community in America wasn't ready to pick up what she was throwing down, so she had to search for better opportunities abroad. Well, that was definitely a good choice because she soon found herself dancing in the presence of wealth and royalty across London.
Oh, it's a beautiful dancer, isn't it?
And Paris.
I'm le de fromage.
Her revolutionary style took the world of dance by storm. With her newfound success, she wished to provide better opportunities for the youth, opportunities that she wished that she had as a spry sapling. In order to do so, she opened up an informal dance school in Berlin, Germany in 1904, which, along with teaching kids their ABCs and 1, 2, 3, also put interpretive dance on the menu, not as a profession, but as a hobby and method of expression. After about a decade, Isadora left to open up a second school in Paris after a certain Austria started getting hungry for conflict. Unfortunately, the new school didn't last very long as tensions escalated and the Great War broke out in Europe, so she fled back home to the US right when the getting was good. As for her personal life, her travels introduced her to many suitable bachelors across the art world. She found love multiple times and Cupid shuffled into the sheets, popping out 3 kids. But of course, fate would have other plans for this happy chapter. For instance, one of her children died in infancy. The other 2 cruised along in a car with their caretaker and crashed into the River Seine. They drowned. Understandably, Isadora spiraled into a deep depression in her later years and fell out of the spotlight, her debts piling up as high as her empty liquor bottles. But this life of misfortune was about to be topped off with a disastrous bow. On September 14th, 1927 in Nice, France, Isadora was riding shotgun in a fancy car while wearing an abnormally long fancy scarf. Normally, the combination of heavy machinery and loose articles of clothing warrant a live leak watermark, and poor Isadora was about to learn why. As the vehicle sped off and she bid her farewells, her fashionable fabric forged her fate. Her long scarf that was whipping in the wind became entangled in the rear tire of the car, wrapping around the rear axle and pulling tight. In an instant, the scarf became a noose, and Isadora's neck was snapped before she could even react. At just 50 years old, the spotlight faded on the inspirational dancer. Now trust me, for the life of me, I really want to pronounce this guy's name as Tycho Brahe, but apparently the proper Danish pronunciation is Tycho Brahe. Like, listen to this.
Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe.
Person saying this doesn't even sound confident in their own pronunciation. Anyway, teeny tiny Tycho was the talk of the town back in the 16th century. He was renowned as one of the world's greatest astronomers and one of the last great astronomers before the invention of the telescope. So these guys were just raw dogging the heavens trying to figure it all out.
Hey, is that a new star up there?
Oh, where?
Right over...
Oh, nope. I lost it. But that, of course, didn't discourage the celestial sillybillies from trying to figure out how the known universe worked, or at least what the human eye could see. Born and heir to many of the Kingdom of Denmark's noble families, Tycho was loaded, and thus well-educated. He made several breakthroughs in the field of astronomy, and even dabbled in astrology and alchemy. But we know those are more of pseudoscience poppycock. Well, unless you're a middle-aged woman who thinks that jerking a crystal with rainwater will make all of your wishes come true, or whatever.
A new hand touches the beacon.
Despite his innovations of spotting new stars and measuring the skies with rather impressive accuracy, he still made the oopsie of proposing his own geocentric model, which put the Earth in the center of the universe rather than the Sun. The planets revolved around the Sun, but the Sun revolved around the Earth. He almost had it. Don't worry though, Copernicus took home the blue ribbon with his heliocentric model. The thing about newer branches of science is that there's a lot to discover as you put the fundamental pieces together, which grants you a lot of leverage over outsiders looking in who just don't understand it quite yet. That being the case, many higher nobles and even the king himself applauded Tycho and his efforts, just stuffing his pockets with money to fund any and all research that he desired to advance the field of astronomy. What's that? You've charted over 700 stars? Beautiful. There's things called supernovas? Fantastic. Comets are just burning bits of rock? Amazing!
Can you leave?
Danish King Frederick II was so tickled by Tycho's work that he granted him an estate on an island to build his own personal, customized observatory so that he could look up at the sky in complete solidarity. And so he did. For about 21 years, Tycho plotted the planets, tracked the transits, and crunched the calculations. Everything seemed great. At least until King Frederick bit the disease dust and his 11-year-old war-obsessed, noble-hating son took over and threatened to seize Tycho's land and assets. Not wanting to deal with this two-body problem, the astronomer said screw it and shifted his orbit over to Prague, where he was invited to build another observatory. This time, however, he took on an apprentice, one Johannes Kepler, who would go on to influence many famed physicists like Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton. Together, the two continued where Tycho left off before getting booted from his Tower of Solitude. But everything came to a halt in 1601 when attending a banquet. According to Kepler, Tycho was in agonizing discomfort. You alright? Nope, gotta piss real bad. Dude, just get up and go. Nope, bad manners, gotta hold it. Alright, don't complain to me when, you piss yourself.
Ooh, lordy.
Yo, Tycho. Tycho eventually headed home to drain his dragon, but at that point, it would barely even dribble. Over the next several days, the pain got excruciatingly worse, and there was no relief in sight. Just 11 days after holding in his pee to avoid bad etiquette at dinner, Tycho Brahe died of a completely avoidable bladder infection. Remember, fellas and fellettes, listen to what your body's telling you, otherwise, you might just piss it off. For poor Cornelia Zangaribandi, little is really known about her life, as the only remarkable thing about the wrinkly Diovelina was her mysterious, sudden, and fiery fate. That's because Cornelia is one of the unlucky few cases of a phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion. A cause of death in which the victim suddenly bursts into flames seemingly unprovoked or without an obvious cause and is reduced to nothing but a pile of ash. But when you really dig deep into the dirt of these cases, you start to recognize some patterns. For one, the victims are almost always alcoholics to some degree and recently horked down a medically inadvisable amount of booze. That's the spirit, and that's the wine. Next, the victims tend to be elderly females. Not that it necessarily makes much of a difference, but combustible Cornelia here was 66 years young when she attempted to cosplay as a phoenix. Additionally, there was always an external source of ignition, which, in my opinion, completely invalidates the whole spontaneous aspect. So what did the heck happened to our Cornelia? Well, on one fateful night in 1731, the Italian noblewoman had just finished off a non-stereotypical meal. Countess Cornelia was reported by her maid as acting rather, quote, dull and heavy, slomping around to and fro after downing a hefty heap of brandy. The maid helped the inebriated elder to her room, and the two spent several hours chit-chatting and shooting the shit. The countess was also a creature of habit, habitually applying some of her own personal ointment across her withering frame, an icky-sticky camphorated brandy mix which helped with her pain relief. After some bobbitying and a bit of boopying, the maid left the countess's room after she boarded the train to Sleepy Time Junction. And so, all was well. Until the next morning. Cornelia was noted to be sleeping in a bit later than usual, but that was to be expected after how heavily she drank the night before. The maid eventually entered the countess's chambers to find something horrifyingly perplexing. According to the eyewitness, this is what she found. 4 feet distance from the bed was a heap of ashes, 2 legs untouched from the foot to the knee with their stockings on. Between them was the lady's head, whose brains, half of the back part of the skull, and the whole chin were burnt to ashes, amongst which were found 3 fingers blackened. All the rest was ashes. A small oil lamp on the floor was covered with ashes, but no oil in it. The Countess was dead. The curious part is that no other pieces of furniture in the room seemed to be affected by the suspected blaze. Instead, everything was draped in a greasy, smelly soot. Now, it may have appeared as a mysterious death to the people of the time, but us modern folk live in an age of true crime podcasts and such, so it's pretty easy to piece together what probably happened. Nevertheless, it's a pretty tragic way to go, but probably a good reminder to never handle open flames after converting your body into a human Molotov cocktail. The Mughal Empire was one of the richest and longest ruling empires in the history of India, but it was almost lost in its infancy. Inheriting the newly founded empire in 1530 from his dad at the age of 22, Emperor Humayun bit off way more than he could chew. He was an inexperienced ruler and lacked a lot of the self-confidence and leadership qualities that you'd expect from an emperor. But he was the eldest son, so it all went to him. Gotta love primogeniture. That, my good fellows and fellettes, is the word of the day. Now, with it being a new empire and all, there was a problem with consolidating power. Lots of the local governors and leaders resisted Mughal control. To help disperse some of that responsibility, Humayun granted some land to his 3 younger half-brothers, all of whom were little heads, constantly undermining their older brother to the point of collapsing the empire as a whole. Not far off, another ruler had taken notice of the young emperor's power struggle. This guy was Sher Shah Suri of Bihar, and he saw quite the opportunity in front of him. Not wanting to waste any time, he quickly gathered his army and made a push for Agra, the capital of the Mughal Empire, and one sheep's onomatopoeia away from being a Disney IP. Humayun retaliated, and the two clashed on the battlefield. After a few skirmishes, the two agreed to a diplomatic end to the fighting. Sher Shah was given control over some territory in exchange for a peaceful retreat. He agreed, but since the deal did not explicitly state no takesy-backsies, the conniving little devil immediately reneged on the agreement and slaughtered the Mughal army, with Humayun barely escaping across the Ganges. The retreating emperor pleaded with his 3 brothers for support, but they were too busy negotiating with Sher Shah over what land they would receive after their brother's demise. I told you they were shitheads. Unfortunately, Humayun did lose his empire in 1540 and was exiled to Persia for 15 years. But while in Persia, he was able to use some charisma to persuade the Safavid emperor to provide some military support so he could go back and kick the Shah's shit in, which is what happened. The Mughal Empire was restored in 1555 and all was right again. That is, until about a year later in 1556, where Humayun met a rather silly demise. When leaving his library with a handful of books, the emperor had to walk down a bunch of stone steps. Since OSHA training wasn't yet mandatory or invented, Humayun was unaware of the dangerous predicament he had put himself in. After hearing the call for daily prayer, his own muscle memory took over and he knelt down to acknowledge that call as he did on a regular basis. But this time, he tripped, slipped, and tumbled down the entire stone stairwell, bashing his melon open on a stone corner. The poor guy died 3 days later of his injuries. But at least the Mughal Empire reigned for another 300 years, so that's a positive. And so there you have it. Remember, luck isn't always on your side. But this video's on my side, so go check it out. Also, remember to subscribe. I'll see you over there.